Perfect. Um, all right. Well, as Aaron said, I'm Dr. Kunjapur, Aditya Kunjapur. I'm an assistant professor in chemical and biomolecular engineering at the University of Delaware. And I'm happy for the invitation to try to share my 2 cents related to grantsmanship, um, a really important topic for us all. So my disclaimer getting started here is, as we all know, grant writing is very context dependent. And so the suggestions that I'm going to try to impart here, so hopefully a decent fraction of them could apply to you. But I think when it comes to our field and our projects, our institutions, as well as our target agencies, there could be differences in what the reviewer pool or the program officers are looking for. And so I try to think about all of these, particularly as my next slide will show. I work in the area of synthetic biology, and so there's a wide array of different target agencies that could be applicable. In fact, if you're a clinical NIH-oriented investigator, my suggestions may be the least relevant for you, and I know that's a large percentage of our Excel Delaware audience, but hopefully you'll find something useful in there. So my lab is very interested in programming cells, usually bacteria, to perform new kinds of chemistry in order to make interesting small molecules or proteins. And some of those could be in the therapeutic space. Some of them could be in the biopolymer or small molecule space. Our general research theme of interest that differentiates us from others is trying to find underrepresented chemistries in nature and to add those to molecules, which could be useful, for example, for the conjugation of antibody-drug conjugates or for forming certain kind of warheads on natural products or small peptide drugs. So I mentioned a few biomedical examples, but actually what you'll see is that our lab is supported by diverse funding agencies, many of which are not biomedical. And so Aaron actually saw it, I think, that we recently won New Innovator Young Investigator Awards from FFAR and ONR, respectively, which are agriculture and defense oriented. But kind of what I wanted to highlight here is actually, I think, for certain kinds of fundamental research, you can have a project or narrative that can be applicable across, multiple different kinds of agencies. In particular, I think there's a lot of possible directions to take more fundamental early stage biomedical projects that could be perceived as too early for the NIH and maybe steer them towards NSF, which in my opinion is willing to take on, a little bit of a higher risk profile if it is pitched as not biomedical explicitly. So that's not actually something that I'll go into detail about here. But anyway, so I've done some thinking like that and have been fortunate to so far raise $3.5 million in total funding for my lab. And actually I have an award pending that'll make that $6 million by the end of 2022. So I've been very lucky there. 2019 was a good year to start a lab, certainly compared to 2020 or 2021. So very privileged there. And I just basically wanted to say that just so you know that there is some, I guess, success here going into these suggestions, but again, very context dependent. So with the time I have left, I wanted to take you through 7 suggestions that I had. I thought 7 was a reasonable number and that all of these topics were important. There's probably more as well. And that's the research sponsor fit, highlighting your innovation, de-risking your approach, writing with clarity and detail, seeking out help, planning well in advance, and keeping expectations low. And I think especially, we all do these things. We certainly all have them in mind already. But I think something that has helped me a lot is seeking out help and planning well in advance. So when I get to those, I'll spend maybe a little bit more time if I do this right. So starting with the research sponsor fit. I find that there's multiple sources of getting this information, and when you're just starting out, this was overwhelming. And so I would, look at the grants.gov list maybe initially with certain keyword searches just to get a lay of the land of what agencies could be applicable. And again, if you're very NIH focused and you want to stay that way, that's maybe not the most useful hint or suggestion, but there are a lot of different solicitations across the different ICs, more of which could be relevant than I expected. And sometimes, rather than just looking at the websites, talking to program officers can help make that clear, especially if there's a notice of special interest. For the DoD or DOE, these agencies tend to write more in the way of reports that outline their funding agency priorities, and they love to see those reports cited in the introduction and background sections of their proposals. And then if you have peers either from your the same postdoc or graduate school lab or other folks who are doing similar kind of research, I found that using Grantsmanship or NIH Reporter to see what other folks are targeting with similar ideas was very helpful initially. So once you have that general lay of the land, I believe that at least at most of the funding agencies, and particularly in my community, what gets reviewers excited is really the novelty and originality aspect. Now, I know that for certain NIH solicitations especially, the significance or the feasibility of the approach may overtake that in importance. But in general, when I'm trying to write a proposal or think about a project, I'm trying to, at the early career stage especially, target things that might seem ambitious, because I find luckily that there have been a lot of opportunities created for high risk, high impact type of submissions. Of course, at other solicitations, the reviewer feedback will be this is too risky. So I think you have to adjust the risk profile for the solicitation. But in general, you want at least 3 elements or so that make your proposal seem unique, especially if each aim has that special ingredient, something that's innovative. I wrote non-NIH here just because NIH explicitly has an innovation section. But what I found interesting for some of my other submissions is actually bringing in that philosophy and having a section, even if it's just a bulleted list rather than paragraph text, that really highlights what's new or innovative about this proposal. And I like to illustrate that as well, so that the figures for reviewers who are flipping through maybe a little bit more quickly can really see that innovation. So with riskier proposals and this idea of innovation, you have to balance the putting forth an idea that you want to seem very fresh and new, and the obvious critique that a reviewer could have that, well, how do I know that this is going to work, or what if it doesn't? So in my limited experience, I have had some success and some fun in rare cases thinking about, okay, what might be considered a clever pitfall alternative approach strategy. So, a pitfall, that part of it is not necessarily clever, but how you might respond to it. I have found in a couple of proposals that the alternative approach that I suggest is creative and maybe seems effective, but it still doesn't make sense as my plan A. And I think that could be strong. But in general, even if you write that, I think reviewers tend to be more convinced by actually seeing certain things click in your preliminary data. So in terms of de-risking the approach, you have your startup funds or seed funding. I really like to use those to de-risk, somewhat in a startup philosophy, failing fast, to try to go towards go, no-go milestones quickly for what could be first aims of different proposals. And, given the inherent nature and risk of research, 1 or 2 might stick, the rest don't. And so then you take that 1 or 2 and try to build an aim around it and show that it's been de-risked. And then I really try to work with my trainees actually to find out what actually happened in the lab, because if you are trying to de-risk in this way with preliminary data, it's very helpful if you can send your trainees a little bit of a structured outline and say, this is what test I'm going to try to describe in this proposal and why. Could you fill in the details of what methods you might be using, as well as maybe make a figure caption based on the preliminary data. Now, I think that really depends on what stage you're at. In my first year of starting the lab, I was still close enough to my students in the ground to know what those techniques were. But nowadays, having about to be 5th-year graduate students and a lab of 13 full-time equivalents, I find that actually if I send it out to them, my senior graduate students are much more likely to come up with a realistic plan, and that they already have that text probably somewhere, maybe in their lab notebook. It's a good exercise for getting them to gear it up for a manuscript anyway. And that actually relates to writing with clarity and detail, because when you spend a lot of time in your office just thinking about the science, I feel like now I've transitioned more to this big picture idea thinking, but the little details can be hard for me to write, what buffer, etc. And your proposals don't necessarily need what buffer conditions, but if you can get to that level of detail a little bit for certain protocols or procedures that might either seem more risky or less within your wheelhouse, it can help convince a reviewer that you can actually do it. So I like to have that mix of, let's make sure it's polished and that everything looks really nice at the high level, that the big picture ideas are very clear and organized, that there's signposting and other texts that can guide reviewers who are coming from distant fields. But then I can take you into the aim or approach and really convince you in just maybe a few of the right places that we can actually do this. For example, for some of my work, for one project, we are trying to do an animal study, and that's not actually experience that I have. I would be doing it with a collaborator, but that was the part where I actually really wanted to go into, and perhaps needed to anyway, the study design and details, a more detailed vertebrate animal plan and all the controls and explanations that we have on campus resources and all of that, just to help convince feasibility, reviewers of feasibility. But in general, yeah, I think a lazier reviewer may not be taking as much time to look through and can judge the proposal on how it looks. So I said that I would spend, I'm sorry I'm going fast, but I think I was told 5 minutes and I'm probably well in excess of that already. So for seeking out help, I learned a lot from sharing my early proposals with mentors in particular, as well as my students, as I already talked about. The students didn't necessarily know what a proposal should look like, so they need examples. If I do ask them for help, I usually share with them also an example of what the style should look like. Collaborators, especially for a collaborative project or something adjacent, can have a lot of useful perspective on the expertise and potential critiques that reviewers might have. Same for mentors and peers. At Delaware, we have an NIH grant writing academy as well as a career academy for the NSF. And there we had the opportunity to work with a grant writing consultant. And I found that actually to be quite useful in learning about how to describe my science at that 10,000 foot level that for a non-science audience might be relevant. Now, I was surprised then when I submitted my career and reviewers said, all their critiques were highly detailed. So actually, I think I learned that, I learned how to describe my science and how to write in a certain way that would be more accessible. But I also learned that the reviewers, if you send, especially to a solicitation that's common in your community, they don't necessarily need that high-level background. You can actually kind of jump in already with them. So it helped me understand different kind of strategies and who my audience might be. But in the process of working with a grant writer, someone else saw the text as it was developing, and then I saw it again weeks later. We just started the whole process earlier. The Career Academy takes months. And that just meant that I realized that when I looked at my own writing 2 weeks or a month later, I saw lots of places for improvement. So I would suggest in that sense that you plan well in advance. My most successful proposals have been those that I let sit for a little while. One example of this is during a January winter session. I wrote 90% of a proposal, wasn't sure about it, shopped it around with other folks, and this agency, NSF, had a rolling deadline of May. So I ended up submitting it in April, and it improved significantly during February and March. And those kind of months, I wasn't actively working on it. I just had that advanced time to send it out to people like mentors or students. And what was really important was then to have a calendar so that in January I knew that I could begin working on something due in May. The other thing related to this is if you get an opportunity to serve as a reviewer, if you can time things correctly, especially, that's very helpful. Last thing I just want to kind of conclude on here is we're all, I think, very unlikely to be awarded our first major proposal submission on our first try. The ONR young investigator took me 3 tries, and talking to the program officer, I'm on my 3rd try for the NSF career. So, bake in planning to try again, and give yourself some time during eligibility windows. I personally really like NSF as an agency. I think NIH reviewers, the right ones, can do this too. But NSF reviewers really taught me how to write grants. They provided very helpful feedback on the grants that were turned down, and that really, and having reviewed for them, they don't do like not discuss, at least not for early career PIs. So they have a real commitment, I think, to give that kind of feedback and make the review process educational. So in that sense, it's, try to enjoy the process. When funds are tight and stress is high, it can be really hard, but grant writing is one of my favorite parts of the job, as it allows us to really brainstorm deep into the future and deep into scientific detail, and put those ideas on paper. So anyway, those are my 7 suggestions, and I'd like to acknowledge the lab and the funding agencies, and then open it up for questions from you. Thanks.
Hi, Aditya. This is Hakeem from Dell State. Great presentation. I love the 7 suggestions. My question was to the